on?
Yes, Minister, I'm here.
Right. So what I've discussed, members, this morning is that we will go through the matrix, the recommendations, and I've asked them to flag and note the recommendations that are in line with the policy and those that are not in line, so that members can easily decipher the different recommendations. It doesn't mean that the ones that are not in line cannot be considered, but it's important that, that the members of the joint select are aware of that. So without further ado—
That's a point of order, Minister.
Yeah, right.
I'd just like to raise a point of order. You have sent out with the agenda minutes of the last two meetings. I just wanted to raise an issue that has not yet been settled, especially because it was raised by me in a previous meeting, and that has to do with a response we were expecting from the OUR in relation to the gas hub question that I had raised. I think you quite rightly had put the OUR to respond. At the time, they did not respond. And I think it is important for us, as we are trying to move forward, to understand how this LNG gas hub works, so that the intended benefits to the Jamaican people are in fact realized. As you know, the construction of this infrastructure is billed to JPS customers, and quite rightly so. But there are other customers of the this infrastructure that relates only to the owner of the infrastructure, and the intention was those other customers will help to pay for the infrastructure. I haven't gotten from the OUR through you a definitive position, and I think it is very important that that be settled.
Thank you, Member Paul, and I will have that followed up absolutely to make sure that a response is forthcoming in the shortest possible time. I agree with you that it's very, very important, and also it goes to the transparency and accountability.
Minister, I have a preliminary question I want to raise, a preliminary matter, and that is the matter of the oversight of the arrangements by the OUR of the arrangement between the gas supplier and JPS. We have been previously told that with respect to these agreements with JPS and independent power producers, and more generally third parties, that these arrangements are commercial arrangements and cannot be shared to the public. Understand that. However, the question still remains as to what then is the role for the OUR in the monitoring of these arrangements, because it must be recalled that JPS is a exclusive, is a monopoly, the utility, a monopoly company, and the public interest can only be protected in that scenario by the OUR for which it was established. But so specifically, I want to understand from the very beginning, because I think it's going to affect certainly the way I view this deliberation and some of the positions that we take, as to what is the oversight role for OUR, specifically on the gas arrangement between the JPS and New Fortress Energy.
Member, I take your point, and I am thinking aloud that there may need to be a discussion with OUR, obviously, not as part of the joint select, but maybe with a few of the members, agreed selection of members, to get a better understanding so that it can guide us in our deliberations. So I'll speak to the members.
Thank you, Minister.
especially because obviously couldn't be done in a forum such as this. It would have to be done in a meeting form.
Okay, all right.
So I think the last time, Member Paul, we had agreed to defer the minutes until after the meeting to give everybody a chance. So we'll take the both sets of confirmation of minutes of July 1st and July 28th. And again, if you want us to take it at the end, so people can have a chance to just review it. But I went through it and I didn't see anything. I
did too, apart from the issue I raised, but other members might want the opportunity to brief themselves.
So members, can you just indicate whether you want to defer till the end of the meeting to give you some more time, or you want to take it now? Anybody has any objection to taking it now?
No objection from me.
All right. All right, so we'll take, if nobody else has any objection, we'll take the minutes of July 1st, 2021 and July 28th, 2021. Can I have somebody to?
I'll move.
Member Paul Well, seconded by?
I'll second, Minister. Allen.
Member Allen, Member Janice Allen, seconded. Thank you very much. All right, so we'll move now to the matrix. I think, Ms. Mack, I think we agreed that somebody's going to share a screen and put it up, and then Denise and yourself will carry us through it, item by item.
Yes, Minister. I'm not sure if Ms. Thomas made arrangements with someone in the ministry to share, but it's on.
It's on screen. It's shared. It's on. I'm seeing it. Everybody, all other members seen it?
Yes, and we have physical copies too, so yes.
Excellent, excellent. All right. So, Denise, you want to proceed?
Yes, Minister. So I'm just trying to zoom in a bit here. Okay. So the matrix would have at the top the various stakeholders that provided their comments, and because of the number of comments received, there is an additional portion to this, which includes comments from Wigton, Wind Farm, and Jamaica Energy Partners. So with the members' permission, I will be able to scroll down at an appropriate time to pick up those additional comments. So we start here with the first recommendation, which is in section 1 of the, we would like to start with the sections of the act itself. So we're going to section 1 with respect to the short title and commencement. And we have a recommendation here.
Just on a point of order.
Yes.
I'm just trying to make sure that my page is the same as yours. The first general recommendation lists the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce.
Yes, Member Paul. Well, we're looking at part 1 of the act. So with your permission, we would like to start by looking at the sections that speak to the act, and then go back at the end to look at the general comments, because there's quite a bit of overlap with the general comments and those that speak to specific sections.
Might I just point out though that the hard copy that we received is not yet completed with your information that you're showing here, unless maybe this is an updated version. So if you could possibly make your screen a little bit larger, that might be helpful. Is it possible to enlarge it?
Excuse me, ma'am, I'm not sure what you mean about incomplete. It's the same. It should be the same.
Unfortunately, part 2 that I am looking at, which speaks to, or sorry, part 1, the preliminary with the short title and commencement, followed by interpretation and objects of the act, those are not completed on the hard copy. So I'm not seeing the recommendations that are on the screen at this time in the physical copy that I have in my hand.
But it's in 2 parts. Sorry, Minister, through you. It's in 2 parts, Member Allen. So you should have received 2 copies of the matrix, a small version and a larger version. The smaller version has Jamaica Energy Partners and Wigton Wind Farm. That's what you're seeing now?
You may proceed. It's missing, some pieces are missing from mine, but you may proceed.
Okay, I'm so sorry about that.
Okay, thank you, Member Allen. And so this first comment comes from Mr. Gerald Lindo, and it's a recommendation to empower the minister and the office to take climate action. This item is starred as it is consistent with the goals contained in the National Energy Policy.
I don't have a difficulty with that.
Chairman?
Go ahead.
Supportable, yes.
Okay, so we move on to section 2, interpretation. There were a number of recommendations on the interpretation section of the Act, and the primary area of recommendation had to do with the definition of the term avoided cost. And so you see here the comment about some confusion in the industry as to how the term is derived. And so the stakeholders are seeking additional clarity on avoided cost. And again, this is consistent with the National Energy Policy. Other definition of terms, such as the explanation of renewable energy, further elaboration of codes, and information on energy terms such as energy efficiency and energy conservation, the term cogeneration to include trigeneration, and further elaboration of the term supply. And so we have a myriad of comments to support the clarity and understanding of the Act. And those came from the Jamaica Public Service Company, the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, and the Office of Utilities Regulation. We have additional comments from Jamaica Energy Partners on the avoided cost issue, and BMR Energy. So let me just scroll down.
Just what Ted, Minister, if I could propose, before we move on to the others as we're dealing with interpretation. Can we just sign off on each as we go so we don't have to go back up?
Sure. Actually, I actually thought that if there was no objection, nobody raised any concern that it would be. So if you want to see this, everybody to just confirm, that's fine. So after each, once we don't have an issue, everybody just agreed. Yeah. And if anybody wants to raise any clarification, they can do so.
Right. So I'm okay with the first one.
First one was agreed, eh?
Excuse me, Chair. Mrs. Aldred has her hand raised.
Sorry, I missed that. Say again.
The Solicitor General has her hand raised, sir. Mrs. Aldred.
Yes.
Her hand is raised.
Oh, her hand is raised. Okay, great. Yes. I can't say Miss Mac. So when I just advise me here. Go ahead, MG.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Chair. Morning, members of the committee and colleagues. I just wanted to go back to the proposal, which is linked to Section 1 of the Act, and it's referring to an amendment of the definition of integrated resource planning, but the definition of integrated resource planning is not in Section 1, it's in Section 2. So that's the first issue. There's an error. Because my understanding is that the committee has accepted the recommendation. I would also ask for clarity in what exactly is the recommendation, what has been accepted, because the proposal was for an amendment to the definition, for the definition to be enhanced to include considerations of emissions reduction and climate risk. So what exactly would be this amendment? I am not clear. And I think there would need to be some specificity because this is what the drafter will use to make the amendments.
Mr. Tola, you want to respond?
My understanding is that the request from the stakeholder is just for the definition of the IRP to consider emissions and emission reductions and climate risk as a part of the verbiage and the wording. And so because those are criteria that are used in the objective setting and priority ranking for the integrated resource plan, those would be consistent with the work that the ministry does. So I'm not sure if that would support the point that the Solicitor General was trying to make.
And may I just make another point of order, Minister? Having just come out of the work of the ZOSA Joint Select Committee, is it that when these recommendations are taken by us, there will be detailed drafted instructions to the CPC, which will enable us to come back at a later stage to look at the actual wording for amendments or for the new statute. So that what we do today will be preliminary, because in the end, we will have to sign off on the new law with its wordings, all right? I just want to make sure that we are clear on that process.
So if I may, Chairman, that is exactly where I was going. Not to have an issue with the actual proposal itself. I'm not an expert in that area. However, no wording has been suggested. We don't know what the language will look like. And that is what is missing from here. So again, as has been articulated by Member Paulwell, I needed to clarify what exactly the committee was agreeing to, if it's just the general proposal, and then just the process of getting the language, because this is something that very specific instructions would have to be given, because this clearly is a technical area and not one that can be deciphered by lawyers. And the OPC, it's comprised, the drafters comprised of lawyers.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, so what I'm actually recommending, Minister, because I do see the difficulty that the SG is having, that what we should do is go through these recommendations, accept or not, and then to provide detailed drafted instructions to the CPC, which will explain by those details some of the specific terms and terminologies that we are grappling with here. So there's going to be another process that we as a committee will have to return to.
Reasonable. I have no issue with that, save and except to say that that obviously the technical side of it and the wording of it, obviously we would need the input of the technical people before going to draft it, because obviously not all of us are able to assist in that regard, other than to make the decisions in relation to the recommendations. So we'll have to work it through, Member Palmer. But I agree with the concept.
Through you, Chair. Just so that I can understand what we are agreeing to do. We're looking at the recommendations of you to accepting or not the recommendations, and at a later date we're going to look at language. Well, essentially, that's what we're saying.
Member Campbell, you and I, we recently sat on the ZOZO committee, and what happened with that work was that recommendations were made. They actually came back to us in the form of legal language, right? And we accepted or not. In this case, as it's clear, we are not getting precise wording to insert or not to in the statute. And I believe that our work will not be complete until that is returned to us. So a completed document with proposed legislation written in that art form be returned to us for us to agree or not to agree. So these are just recommendations for policy that I think the minister is asking us to pronounce on.
Grateful, thank you.
So my understanding, Member Paulwell, and you would obviously have done this several times during your tenure as minister, is that the report goes to Parliament and is debated, and then what is agreed goes to Cabinet for policy to be determined. So the joint select is not necessarily doing the amendments.
No, that is not my understanding. My understanding is that these recommendations that are before us, which amount to policy issues, that even before the drafts people start to put them in legalese, that you would get clearance from your cabinet that these are policies that they are comfortable with, after which detailed draft instructions will be sent to the CPC for us, because it is this committee that has the responsibility of recommending to the Parliament the amendments, or it could very be a new legislation, and that bill must be handed over to the Parliament by us. So I think it's a lot of moving things, a lot of things that need to be moving in tandem. So I would recommend, Minister, that as soon as you get these recommendations finalized, that you do a cabinet submission and get the cabinet to endorse them.
Absolutely. All right. So we are agreed that we're going to go through and just agree on the recommendations, or not agree on them for this session.
Yes, that's my suggestion.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Tulloch, proceed.
Okay, thank you, Minister. And so we'll look at the interpretation section again. And this recommendation is to define the term codes. And this is speaking to the dispatch code in particular. So at present, there is a generation code, transmission and distribution code, and the Office of Utilities Regulation is seeking further definition on the dispatch code.
Sorry, I cut out a while ago. Go say again.
Yes, Chair, I said that the Office of Utilities Regulation is indicating that while there are codes for generation, transmission, and distribution, they would want to see a definition for the dispatch code included in the Electricity Act. And this would be in keeping with the National Energy Policy.
Okay, so that seems reasonable. No objections to that?
Agreed, Chair.
Proceed.
So we move across under interpretation to the request from the private sector organization of Jamaica to look at elaborating on the term avoided cost, to provide further details on how the cost is derived as a part of the Act. This again is in keeping with the National Energy Policy in relation to transparency.
Agreed, members?
No objection.
So let's make it easy. Unless somebody has an objection, silence is approval.
Okay.
A further interpretation recommendation was received from the Jamaica Public Service Company with respect to the term renewable energy source. And they are proposing to delete the words and include sources prescribed by the minister by order published in the Gazette from the definition. And they're indicating that there should be international consistency on what constitutes renewable energy generation.
All right, no issue with that.
Silence is approval, Denise.
Okay, Minister.
I'll
move on.
Objection, move right on.
Okay, then. The next item has to do with the terms energy efficiency and energy conservation. And the Office of Utilities Regulation has recommended further elaboration of the terms with respect to energy conservation means the practices and actions that reduce the amount of energy that is used, And energy efficiency refers to changing technology or processes so that less energy is used to accomplish the same task or satisfy a need. And these terms are used extensively throughout the national energy policy. Okay, so we move ahead. The definition of the term cogeneration, the private sector organization of Jamaica is asking to add the word trigeneration to the definition and to state that where either word is used, this definition shall apply. So we can move on to a recommendation from the Jamaica Public Service Company to define the term supply. They're asking to amend the definition of supply with respect to electricity so that it means the activities involved in the sale or provision of electricity to consumers. They're saying the definition as presently worded creates a lacuna in the law, which seemingly allows persons to avoid the application of the act where electricity is provided to a third party without the supplier charging for it. So they're seeking the inclusion of the word provision or a suitable mechanism to plug this gap.
Any comment from the lawyers in the House?
All right, I would like to think about this a little bit more. It's from the JPSCO. So what I'm trying to understand, I know that there are some persons who establish their own electricity system through renewables, but they still want to maintain connectivity with the JPSCO. Does this have anything to do with that, the system charge or demand charge? I don't recall the conversation, but I want to be clear that this is not to penalize people who put in their own system.
And Chair, through you, Member Paul.
That's very important, Member Paul. Well, so maybe we need to get some more and better particulars on this particular recommendation.
Agreed,
yes,
Chair.
I think, Chairman, the government has to do everything to encourage greater use of renewables. And that's the reason why I agree with the flexibility in determining what we regard as renewables. But I don't want there to be any restrictions placed unnecessarily on consumers who wish to incorporate their own renewable system as part of their energy supply matrix. And sometimes it can be unfair practice, unfair competition to impose charges that can be prohibitive and in fact create the opposite of not encouraging people to invest in these systems.
Agreed. Member Golden, you wanted to say something?
Chair, I'm in agreement with Member Paul that I too have a caution on this provision for the reasons that he's expressed.
Would you like to defer it for further consideration, or would you like to refuse it?
I would like to defer, sir, Chair, because I'm not recalling in the presentation of JPS, and certainly as I look at my notes, I have some questions that I had highlighted there. I'm not recalling the instances or the details that they had expressed in relation to justification for that kind of, for broadening the definition of supply in that regard. I'm not sure actually that they had spoke specifically to it. I would wish some clarification on the justification.
Noted. Please make a note of that and we can move on, come back to that at a later time and seek the necessary clarification.
Yes, Chair. The next interpretation recommendation comes from the Office of Utilities Regulation, and it is for a definition of the term net billing. Net billing is defined to specifically reference persons who have entered into a standard offer contract with a single buyer. This should be modified to reflect the potential for such arrangements with any other supply licensee. It is suggested that the reference to the single buyer in the definition be replaced with a supply licensee.
I'm trying to grapple with this one as well, Minister. You will recall that we have been debating the twin issue of net billing stroke net metering. In relation to net metering, it is a one-for-one swap. If somebody establish a renewable system, then what they are paid for by the JPS for the additional supply to the JPS system would be the same as what JPS would charge them for their use of electricity. With net billing, it's not one for one. The JPS would take out the transmission and distribution element of their cost and only pay the person who is establishing renewables for sale the net amount. There is a view that does not sufficiently encourage people to invest in the renewable system. The JPSCO's argument is that they need to be compensated separately for when people use their distribution network. So there's this debate that has been going on and off. I'm just wondering if there isn't some mid-ground that the OUR could develop that will continue to encourage people to invest in renewables, but provide an incentive. So it might not be the full net metering, but somewhere beyond just the bare net billing. I know we're dealing with very technical issues, but I hope we understand the point that I'm trying to make, that you really have to put in a sweetener for the investor to put in place a solar or wind system, and that there is the view that just the net billing element alone is not sufficient incentive. Minister, you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, Member Paul. So you want us to take a second look at this, get some final thing, rather than trying to make a decision at this point?
It would be good if the OUR could definitively put to us whether or not they want to maintain the net billing arrangement as is, or whether they would like to incorporate some other element that will provide incentives for people to go out there. We're not, this is not trying to put the JPS out of business. It is really trying to enable the country to cut down on the use of fossil fuel and to provide that incentive for people to invest in this worthwhile effort.
So we'll list this as another item for OUR, for our meeting with OUR prior to the conclusion of the deliberations.
Yes.
Yeah, so we'll have a meeting with OUR with the members to get clarification on these and give them ample time to prepare to respond to us. So that's an OUR outstanding item, Mr. Long. Proceed.
Yes, Chairman, Member
Chairman, I have
Hill
my hand up.
has his hand up.
Who's that?
Member Hill.
Member Hill, welcome. Go right ahead, sir.
Again, to pick up on what Member Paulwell has said. Member Paulwell, I agree with you completely. And I think the big issue is that you have the transmission and distribution costs being calculated and tabulated by the JPS alone, that has a keen interest in making sure that its interests are covered. We don't necessarily know how those transmission costs and distribution costs are tabulated. So we would have to get more information on that. But you're absolutely right. Right now, what we have as net billing is a clear disincentive, a large disincentive to people who want to go into renewable energy, because there is so much net in the billing to the investor that it is a disincentive. It might very well be, and the time has come, in my view, that distribution and transmission should be separated out from power production. And the same owners who own the distribution and transmission now within the combine of the JPS could be the same owners, but with a change. Because the transmission and distribution business is a monopoly business, there'll not be another one in Jamaica. Jamaica is too small to necessarily have a whole set of brand new distribution system competing with the existing one. So because it's a monopoly business, it should be, a portion of it should be put on the stock exchange so that Jamaican taxpayers can invest in this company that is largely a monopoly company. And there would then be clear openness as to what it is, because every 3 months you have to submit to the stock exchange, you're regulated, and Jamaicans could participate in what's a monopoly company now. And that should, I believe that's where we should be looking to go with this license, so that then the transmission distribution people who run that business become really efficient at what we do, would be largely agnostic as to the competitive costs for energy that would go in, except that they would now have the lowest cost, because producers of energy would be competing on a level playing field without one of the distributors owning the transmission and distribution system exclusively. And we need to get to a place where we, as I said before, invest in what is our equivalent of Saudi Arabian or Venezuelan oil or sunshine, which we have a very high global horizontal irradiance in Jamaica, and we have consistently not invested in this. And a policy such as this that exists for net billing is a clear disincentive, and it has to be changed. Now, clearly the OUR can give us some recommendations, but really it is us who make policy. They don't make policy, they interpret and advise. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Member Hill.
As a follow-up to that, Chairman, the member has raised a very fundamental issue. I believe it's high policy that you might even wish for the cabinet to contemplate. And remember, we had suggested, Chairman, that this period of time might be opportune, seeing that we are looking at the end of the so-called JPSCO monopoly, and that you might wish to take on board some of these issues as you now enter negotiation for that new license. But I think the members, the points that he raised, and especially in the context where the government of Jamaica owns 20% of those shares, that it could be a matter that could even be addressed now in relation to those shares that the government owns. Yeah.
If I may come back in, Chairman, a very important part of my recommendation, though, is that the transmission and distribution must be split off into a special purpose vehicle just to do transmission and distribution. Can be with the same owners, but now, because it's going to be traded on the stock exchange, we'll have a completely different transparency. And part of that agreement would be that how you calculate the cost that you infuse into a net billing system is completely open, transparent, and can be questioned and agreed.
Point taken and noted, and I'm sure that we'll have further discussion on this. And of course, Member Hill is a member of the cabinet, so he'll have more than enough to be able to make this point there.
So the next recommendation is coming from the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, and they are seeking a better definition of the term generate. Not sure what it is.
We're not seeing what you're seeing anymore.
You're not seeing? The table is not being shared?
So it's showing a different page. Sorry.
Oh, okay. My apologies. Are you seeing it now?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Yes, it's better. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
You can take down your hand now, Member Hill.
So the
Will
recommendation.
do, Chairman. Thank you.
Recommendation from the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica is to improve on the definition of the term generate to include production of electricity by means of an electricity generating set to include production from renewable energy sources. And that is in line with the national energy policy.
Yeah, that sounds to be fine.
We'll move to the next recommendation, which is from the Jamaica Public Service Company. They are seeking definition of the term use of system charge, and it is being proposed that the definition be expanded to include any cost to be incurred by the single buyer to enable the wheeling of electricity. And this is intended to capture the recovery of incremental investment in the grid by the single buyer that is required to facilitate the needs of the person specifically engaged in wheeling, so as to ensure that this additional cost is not borne by other customers.
But it's a matter that we had addressed earlier, Minister, that I think we need better particulars on. I had dealt with it from the standpoint of the net billing for small users, but this has to do now with wheeling. Wheeling has not happened for Jamaica, even though it has been policy for a long time. There has been a lot of toing and froing about wheeling. People had applied and they got frustrated because of this issue of system charge. So as far as I'm aware, not one of those applicants has yet gotten a license for wheeling. And I think we want to pause to ask the OUR some questions about this one as well.
Accepted.
The next item, still under section 2, interpretation, is the OUR's recommendation for further definition of the term power purchase agreement. And here they're asking for the definition to be expanded to contemplate agreements between generation licensees and supply licensees, and not to be exclusive to the contractual arrangements with a single buyer. And so they're consistently seeking to remove the word single buyer and replace it with supply licensee.
And Minister, earlier on, my colleague, Mr. Hilton, had raised this issue about transparency in these PPAs, power purchase agreements, and wanted to ensure that the OUR has full access to those details. My own view, as I have already canvassed it, is that there should be no reason why a select committee of Parliament couldn't have purview, viewing of these arrangements. Yes, there are commercial arrangements, but especially in the context of a monopoly distributor, it is important that at least us, we the elected representatives of the people, be shared, that the details be shared with us, so that we would know whether or not these agreements are fair and open and transparent or otherwise. And I did make the point that we should try to refrain from getting into these 20-year arrangements for the future. But I'm probably that will have to be contemplated by the cabinet separately.
Proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. The next recommendation comes from Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. They are seeking definition of the term grid parity. They're asking to make the basis of determining levelized cost of electricity clear. And they had also referenced earlier avoided cost. And so this speaks to clarity being sought.
Chairman, may I make a comment on avoided cost?
Sure, member, go ahead.
In the past, I remember when I started looking at avoided costs some 7 or 8 years ago, I was told that the basis of our avoided cost then was the cost of coal. So I went away and I looked at how much coal we used as our source of generation in Jamaica. And I found out what I found out. And I went back to the OUR then and said, how much coal have we used, do we now use today in generation? None. How much coal did we use in generation 50 years ago? None. How much coal did we use 100 years ago? None. And yet, Minister, because coal was seen as the cheapest cost for energy that we have never used in this country, that became the basis on which avoided costs was calculated. Now, since then, I'm very sure the OUR adjusted, but it's quite possible that we need to look and question, not just look, question. We must not accept these things that are given to us by experts. When I go out as an expert, when I was operating as a banker, when I go out as an expert, my clients question me on everything. But we tend to accept, we need to now know what is the basis of the avoided cost calculation. How do you get to it? And why do you use that lowest cost that you're using as the basis, if you are using a lowest cost for calculation? So let's not take it as a given. It's something that is postulated that must be questioned in detail, because it's a basis of a major way that we calculate energy and the cost of energy and how we grow our economy. So it's vital that we don't just accept it. We need to understand it and question it. Thank you.
Point taken, and we have a responsibility as we are the ones who have been charged for the review. And of course, you know that this has an effect on every single Jamaican. So I agree with you 100%.
The next recommendation, Chair, is coming from the Office of Utilities Regulation, and it is for a definition of the term single bio. And they are saying that the definition of single bio does not take into consideration the purchase of electricity through cogeneration, power interchange agreements, and dumped energy arrangements, which are features of the electricity industry. It is recommended that the single buyer definition be amended as follows. Single buyer means the licensee whose license obligates it to purchase electricity generated by independent power producers, persons having net billing arrangements, co-generators, and persons with other arrangements. I'll start with that one and wait before moving to the second, unless you'd like me to continue.
Proceed. One says no hand raised or no objection. Proceed.
The further request from the OUR on this interpretation is that the definition of co-generator shall be considered as follows. Co-generator means a licensee who produces both useful heat and electrical power from a single generating source. And this definition is consistent with the definition currently in the Electricity Act. That is the definition of co-generator. The single buyer definition is different. Proceed.
Just to get clarity, Chair, so we're agreeing to the definition for the single buyer and as well as what is proposed for co-generator? Chairman?
Say again, Essie.
It's Mrs. McCarthy, sir. I was just asking if it is that the committee is agreeing to the two because when I'm looking at it, there are two definitions proposed, co-generator as well as single buyer. So the committee has accepted that, as well as I need some clarity on whether or not the committee agreed to the definition of grid parity, or that there be a definition for grid parity.
Members, your silence was approval, but you're seeking clarification. So I take it that the silence is approval for both.
Chairman, I think we're agreed on the cogeneration and single buyer definitions. Not clear on whether or not we were agreed on the grid parity.
We did agree to a change on the cogenerator as recommended by the PSOJ, if I remember. PSOJ made a recommendation for purchase agreement, single buyer. What is the other one we're looking at? We just scroll definition of co-generator, yes.
Yes.
System operator. Are we now at system operator?
No, we're moving across to the recommendation on the definition of the term integrated resource planning.
Oh, the IRP. Oh, yes. That should move so fast.
And this comes from the private sector organization of Jamaica.
I think the word resilience, they should be inserted at reliability. One of the things I'd like to see happen with the IRP chairman, and I may have said this to you in a private conversation, is that the truth is the participants in this sector, especially independent power suppliers, don't, in their view, get enough exposure to the IRP while it is being considered and put together. And certainly after the draft is completed, they feel very excluded and never get to participate. And yet they are so affected by it. So in this recommendation, I think it should be clearly included that the participants in the sector, and we can categorize them, should have access to the draft, original draft and amendments that come along, so that they can give their input before being given a fait accompli document over which they have had very little or no say, and yet they must go ahead and comply with it. So I think we need to, Ms. Tuller, you can find a wording that might meet that kind of requirement.
Yes, member here.
Just a note, Mr. Chairman, in relation to the definition of co-generator, which we are accepting, that proposal, that would then have to be consistent with the inclusion.
While you're breaking up, I can't hear you very well.
Generation.
Yes, Member Campbell, what they have done is just inserted a licensee who. So the wording is the same as in the act, but they have inserted means a licensee who.
Yes, I'm clear on that.
Yes.
I'm clear on that. The point I'm making is that we have previously accepted a proposal that the term tri-generation be included in the definition of the term cogeneration. And I'm saying if we are including now or inserting now a definition of cogenerator, then that definition needs to be consistent with the proposed amendment we have accepted in relation to the definition of cogeneration.
Yes. Noted, Member Campbell, and Chair Miss, is it Cunningham? Shanae has raised her hand. Is it member?
Yes, sure. No, Legislative Council from the
Legislative
Houses
Council.
of Parliament. I'm sorry, let me get my camera on. Sorry, I just wanted to get some clarification, my apologies, on the grid party. Is it that there's going to be a definition that is proposed and then it's going to come back to the next meeting? Because I know that it was accepted, but it just says make it clear, but they didn't propose a wording. So is the wording going to come back at a later meeting?
If I could comment on that, the answer would be yes, as this levelized cost is again speaking to the avoided cost. It is referring to how does this match with avoided cost, which is explained in the Act. So yes, there would have to be further clarification on avoided costs, levelized costs, and how they two interrelate.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, Chair, I didn't understand the PSOJ to be impacting the definition of grid parity necessarily, but it seemed to me they're almost implying that we include a definition of levelized cost of electricity, and I guess the same would apply in relation to avoided costs, which we already have. To make the basis of determining levelized cost of electricity clear in my mind doesn't necessarily fit within the actual definition of grid parity, but I yield to the drafters on that.
Chairman, I know that members might be having issues with some of the definitions, with some of the terms. I had sensed that earlier when we were talking about cogeneration, because just to be clear, when somebody cogenerates, he is generating both electricity and something else. So it could be heat or steam. And sometimes I'm sure that people don't appreciate those terminologies, and probably what we could do just to enable us to move a little quicker sometimes, Chairman, is just to keep these definitions, keep these issues probably on top page somewhere, so that people, people know exactly what we are talking about. I think we're quite clear about single buyer and supplier, but issues like cogenerator and so on. I just thought we could flag those on each page. That's a suggestion.
Noted, member.
Chair, I may have missed it, but the discussion on resilience, incorporating resilience in the definition for integrated resource planning, was there a definite agreement on that? I heard Member Hill, but I wasn't sure if...
There was extensive consultation on the IRP for sure.
Chairman, what I was saying is that practically all of the independent producers felt that they were excluded from important discussions. In fact, what they were often given is a fait accompli document. And they're asking that when you're doing an IRP, it cannot be and should not be done that way. So I'm saying that we should make sure when we're drafting this, it's very clear that it is not implied that there should be discussion. It should be stated, and a wide range of participants are allowed to give opinion. I mean, government is still going to do what it has to do, but it's worthwhile to hear what the active participants and the important participants in the sector have to say.
Accepted, and that's my style. So that goes right within how I conduct the affairs.
Yeah, in fairness to you, so we have it recorded, this was before you came to the ministry. It's not at all about your administration here. Thanks.
Excuse me, Chairman, Ms. Samantha Eaton from the OPC would like to make a comment.
Go ahead. Not hearing you.
Not sure what's wrong with her.
She must be having some technical challenges. Are you hearing us? All right, we can proceed, and when she comes back, we can take her.
Yes, Chair. Just want to point out that in this recommendation from the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, it says grid party, but the word was actually grid parity. So I'm making that edit. So the party is now parity. So we move on to, still under section 2, interpretation. We have a recommendation from the OUR for the definition of the term system operator. They indicate that the definition is not clear, as it is the current single buyer that is licensed to conduct dispatch activities and not a department of that entity. And so they're indicating that perhaps provisions should mandate that the single buyer conduct its dispatch activities through a ring-fenced department.
Chairman, this is again another fundamental issue affecting competition. I see the OUR's definition, well, their proposal to have a ring fence system operator, but it is going to abide within the JPS core. I really believe the time has come for this activity to be separated from the JPS core. I can't see why the OUR couldn't develop the expertise to be involved with dispatching. What dispatching means is which of the facilities get priority in the JPS core purchasing electricity, so that you have a number of private power suppliers. They all operate different systems. Some are more efficient than others. Some are ranked higher than others. It is not
of net billing. It should be agreed that, okay, this year you're going to allow 50 megawatts of power to be given on distributed private individual power purchase arrangement for solar or wind or whichever renewable power they're going to have. JPS should have nothing to say as to who gets that. There should be a system independent, preferably run by the OER or somebody like the OER, that would decide when people apply, how quickly it's done. But the JPS should have nothing to do with that, because they're even now a competitor in the renewable space. So anything they have to do anything that would cause a conflict to them should be taken away from them, to save people accusing them very often, probably incorrectly, but sometimes quite correctly. So we move that issue, and I agree with the principle, but we should now be looking at it as a principle, not just an item by item issue that relates to the JPS.
Noted.
I just want to be clear as to what is noted, especially on this matter, because again, it is a fundamental issue affecting competition.
Very fundamental.
Yes, and just to be clear again, Minister, you have about, say you have about 1,000 megawatts of electricity being produced, or there's capacity for 1,000 megawatts. The country doesn't use 1,000 megawatts. So at peak demand, you need about 600 megawatts. Now, it is the JPSCO that will now decide through its dispatching system, which capacity is dispatched onto the grid. And I think what Mr. Hill and myself are agreeing on is that that ought not to be the JPSCO's decision.
You said it perfectly well, member.
Chair, through you.
Agreed, fully agreed.
I'm following on both members Hill and Paulwell's comments. I note is that Parliamentary Council has made a comment in the chat, which I endorse, that some of these proposals for amendments to definitions are in fact substantive provisions, as I indicated earlier with the grid parity issue. And I wonder, our last submission was from the JPSCO in hearing submissions. I wonder, Minister, if we should not have had your team as the drafters of the policy that underscores the bill, the act, if we should not have had them opine and come back to the committee in relation to some of these proposals, which represent quite significant policy shift, before we start talking about whether or not as a committee we accept or not, just to be guided by them in terms of policy intent and where we want to go ultimately. May it please you.
No issue with that. Ms. McCarthy, can you let him member Hilton? He's in the waiting room.
If I could just add a rider to the point made by Mrs. Golden Campbell. I think our concern ought to be whether or not any policy adjustments that we recommend will violate any existing agreements, arrangements with the JPSCO. So I would just like to modify that submission to be a lot more pointed, just for us, Minister, to be guided as to whether these policy changes are going to affect the legal position, contractual position of the company, because I think that ought to be the only consideration in terms of what we as a committee propose for policy changes or otherwise.
And Member Powell, if you'll permit me to return the favor, I would also say not just in relation to the JPSCO, but in terms of the implications on the wider energy and power sector, whether or not these proposals would be affecting that which the committee would wish to support.
All right, fair enough. Agreed.
Sorry, I'm getting scribbling on the screen.
Yeah, I saw that.
I'm not sure where that is coming
Somebody is
from.
scribbling.
Ms. McCarthy, can you see where that might be coming from?
There is a consideration that the two previous members, Golden Campbell and Paulwell, brought up that we need to consider, though. One of the good things that Jamaica has always depended on is that we do not break contracts. We honor our contracts. Even in the toughest economic times, we honored our contracts. However, elected members of parliament and policymakers have their jobs to make policy, and contracts, while we do not make policy to break contracts, we will make policy, we will have to make policy that move the country in a certain direction. For instance, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, Member Paulwell, or somebody's microphone is open, that should be closed. We have some kids in the background here.
Please check your mics, members. Check your mics.
Member Paulwell and Chairman, you will remember 20, 25 years ago, we weren't talking not nearly so much about climate change and how we're messing up the environment and how it affects children and all those things. These days we have to, and so as we make policy, we have to bear in mind not just what has happened in the past, and we will not breach contracts, but we certainly will make policy for the broader Jamaican community that must take us into the future, a future that 15, 20 years ago we didn't know. So I agree with what my two legal learned friends before me said, but just want to make sure that the perspective that we bring is still, as policymakers, we have a future look, whereas we are aware of contracts in the past that we must respect.
Chairman.
Milton.
Apology, I had to rejoin. I gave an indication that I had to slip up, but I'm back. And I just want to join that discussion to inquire, to make this point. Following on the point that Minister Hill was making, that as part of this review exercise, I think this review comes at a point of time when the contract itself comes to an end within a foreseeable time frame. And therefore, I think we have an exceptional opportunity as we look at the review in the act to be thinking not just in terms of the current contract, although that is a reality we must take account of, but to look beyond that to say, what is it that we'll put in place to ensure that our country is not hamstrung again for another 50 years in the way that we've been constrained, that has had serious economic implication, and will even more so going forward because the competition will only intensify, and energy being what it is to the economy. I think this body has a special obligation and responsibility to think very creatively and to take into account not just the existing limitations of the existing license, but what will come or follow after. That's the point I wish to make.
Thank you, Member Hilton. So, Ms. Mack, I hope you got the clarification you were looking for.
Yes, Minister.
We're at 11:30 now, so we have maybe 45 minutes left.
Yes, Chairman.
We'll just continue.
Yes, we continue with comments on and recommendations on the interpretation section of the Act. The next one comes from the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica with respect to the standard of a contract definition. They're seeking to have that definition expanded to include the wording approved by the office for use in promoting renewable energy and other sources that reduces greenhouse gas emissions to include, but not limited to, energy from cogeneration and trigeneration systems with capacity limits. there are no comments on that recommendation, I would like to just move quickly to another recommendation that comes from Jamaica Energy Partners. So let me just move to the bottom of the table. Due to the size of the table, it could not be included at the side. So let me come down here. Right. So this recommendation from Jamaica Energy Partners speaks to the issue of interpretation of avoided cost. And they indicate that the avoided costs should not be used as it creates a false floor. They say avoided costs coupled with a ROFO may prevent customers from benefiting from the lowest cost. The ROFO holder would bid just below the avoided cost value, thus meeting the requirement. However, if it should be used, an independent body should determine this, as it can be manipulated. Such a critical values method of calculation must be stated in the Act.
I share the view that that is a critical concern, that we ensure that the floor, that the floor, the cost floor, is not one that skews the method of evaluation. I'm not technically competent to say specifically what is the response, but that is a concern that I'd like to echo.
Chairman, Member Hill has his hand up as well.
Thank you, Chairman. The whole ROFA issue, which we have discussed at length, I think should be or must be coming to an end. And really, it's not something we should be recommending to go forward on. I talked earlier about the avoided cost and the anomalies that it brings up, and that will need further discussion. But if you remove the ROFR and therefore you put it out to market forces, I mean, Minister, Chairman, members, as much as we can, what we're doing here should be controlled by market forces. Anytime you have anything that limits competition, you're going to get a skewed result. And if the limited competition has one of the participants that has interest in making the decision, then it's going to be even more skewed. So you need to make sure we get rid of the ROFR. I mean, some of it we have much of it is coming to an end, but there are some still going on into the long distance. And we make sure we understand the avoided costs concept, and if we continue to use it, but also market forces must bear when we want the cheapest source of energy that is reliable in this country. It cannot be based on a take or pay or a ROFR arrangement. Those must be reconsidered, rooted from the root up, rooted out, and put in something else. I mean, that's just in the interest of Jamaican taxpayers, whom we represent.
You couldn't say it better, Member Hill. I endorse that 150%, and I'm sure all the other members feel the same way.
The Minister, Senator Crawford has his hand raised as well.
Chairman?
Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I'm good. Morning all. I think though that it carries us back to Senator Golding's initial recommendation, because I would actually like to know why was it done in the first place, and if that need exists or no longer exists. Because I personally, while I understand the cry for anything that could save costs, I would like to know why it was done in the first place, and if that is that no longer necessary for maybe a greater damage that is possible.
Well, two former ministers
Member Paulwell is the best person to answer.
Are here, yes. Minister Paulwell was
Member Paulwell is the best person to answer his colleague.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not following, but if you're saying, what is the point? I wasn't following, please.
Go ahead, Member Crawford.
There was an opinion that the minimum should be removed, or the term is slipping me right now.
No,
And,
the avoided costs. The avoided costs is the term I think you're looking for.
Right.
Yes.
And that should be removed because it created a basic an avenue through which a bid could just be below that or slightly below that and not necessarily driven by market forces. However, I am wondering, why was this put in the first place? And if there's a greater damage that may come from removing it.
Yeah, no, I think
clearly, before you come in, Member Paulwell, because I had addressed this earlier, and I think Member Crawford was not there. I
just want to come in. I just want to come in on a point of order in terms of
go ahead.
My ability and capacity to defend or not. Please recall that I first became Minister for Energy in 2002. This is long after the divestment and new license being given to the JPSCO. And sometimes I think people don't appreciate that fact that I did inherit a license, albeit I would have been a part of the cabinet that would have engaged in those negotiations. The issue of avoided costs and those technical terms, those are issues that the OUR determines. And I think it would be totally unfair for a minister to delve into the basis of those calculations and justifications. I think it's a matter, Minister, that the OUR should quite rightly address to this committee.
Which Member Paulwell, if you remember my contribution earlier, was exactly what I said, that the way avoided costs, first of all, why do you use whatever you use? At one time they use coal, it might be something else now. The way avoided costs is arrived at should not be accepted by us as policymakers, but should be explained and questioned at length. And in fact, we might very well accept it once that is done. But right now, generally, that process is not as rigorous as I think it should be. And we tend to just accept, oh, this is the avoided cost. And we can't do that anymore because it affects so much of what happens in electricity. And I think you agreed with that at the time.
Yes.
So before we agree or disagree on this one, I think that we should delay this one until we get further information.
Well, that's my understanding of the point being made, that the technical response is required.
Yeah, it has to be clarified. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so we'll put this one as deferred again and get the clarification.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'll move back up, if that's okay with the members. That concludes the recommendations on section 2, interpretation, and the next recommendation comes for section 4, roles and responsibilities, comes from Mr. Gerald Lindo. And he is, oh, I need to go up a little more, sorry. Yes, here we are. He is recommending provisioning the Ministry for System Planning. He indicates that Section 4 of the Act gives the Minister the statutory duty to plan the system. And he says, this is good in principle as it gives authority to the minister to drive sector strategy and implementation. The system planning task is a heavy one that must not be underestimated. And if the ministry is to fulfill this role, it must be empowered with the appropriate capacity enhancements within the ministry to execute the highly technical tasks that system planning requires. He goes on to say, it is therefore recommended that the Joint Select Committee should consider whether the ministry should be given more resources for system planning, given the current capacity of the ministry and the experience of the development of the last integrated resource plan.
Minister, I was going to comment that I generally agree that the resources of given the shift that has occurred with the role of the ministry in the sector, that it should be accompanied with commensurate with the capacity to carry out and to discharge that responsibility. The OUR has its own role and acts as an impartial mediator. The ministry must reflect the priority policy planning options for the government and people of Jamaica. And therefore the resource, the technical capacity has to be located not just in the OUR, but in the ministry itself, if that duty is going to be discharged properly.
And in terms of resource, Chairman, with your permission, sorry, go ahead.
In terms of resources, I think before you get to the resource question, you have to look at the capacity and what is needed and design that first, and then do the matters arising from that as to the necessary resource to implement.
And with your permission, Chairman, if I might go one step before what Member Hilton has said, is that broadly, I agree with the principle. And the principle is this: the elected officials, the people's elected officials, must be the one that carry policymaking responsibility. It cannot and should not be downloaded to unelected persons. Member Hilton has clearly defined that the OUR has a particular responsibility and that must be maintained. In fact, they might also need additional capacity if they were to require it. But certainly the principle must be, planning must be in the ministry. And for the ministry to do that, it must have the right capacity. Otherwise, and let me put it bluntly and frankly, the ministry then becomes, if it doesn't have the right capacity, it becomes a creature of the operators, because the operators are going to have engineers, they're going to have strategic planners, they're going to have system analysts, they're going to have distribution experts. The ministry has none of those capacity, and so therefore the ministry will inevitably be at the behest of the utility operator. And that's not to blame the utility operator. It's just, if they're given such a wonderful position to be in, they should use it, and they will use it for their own interests, and not necessarily for the interests that the ministry must represent, which is the ordinary taxpayer, ratepayer person in Jamaica. So I think that this recommendation is a worthy one that needs to be considered. Thank you, Chairman.
I can only tell you that your words are 100% correct, because we are facing that challenge as we speak in the ministry in terms of adequate staffing and technical assistance.
So I'll move on, Chair, to the section 5.
Before you move on, Ms. Teller, all
Yes.
these are noted for consideration and adjustment if necessary, yes? Because we just don't want to come here and talk. We want to make sure that these are going to be, I'm not saying you're not, I'm just asking that it be
Yes,
confirmed.
the ministry team is online and is taking note as well. And Miss McCarthy, her team is also taking note of the recommendations.
Thank you.
And the
Thank you very much.
discussions. Yes. The next section of the Act, Section 5, Directions of the Office. Again, a recommendation from Mr. Lindo to empower the minister and the office to take climate action. And it is proposed that Section 5 should make it mandatory rather than optional. I think it means for the office to consider health and the environment and should explicitly include emissions reductions. No comments?
Well, I don't know if no comment mean we accept. I'm sorry, but I'm not really sure if I understand if it is properly placed to say, I mean, maybe the cabinet or as versus the minister, or the minister in this case represents the cabinet. But is it necessary for this particular bill, that recommendation?
The recommendation is speaking to the OUR.
No, I think it said that the minister should be able to intervene for environment and.
Yes, but then he clarifies it to say the office, which is the OUR in the Act.
So it is not the minister, but the OUR.
Right. It would be
then this is not clearly written. Anytime you write anything that you can get two meanings from, it's not clearly written. The office is mentioned there, but it could very well be the office of the minister. So I just, if that's what is meant, this has to be clarified so that there's no misunderstanding at a later date.
Senator Hill, I also join you in a concern for the transfer of decision and power from the elected to the unelected on too broad of a scale. I think the OUR have a responsibility which is outlined. And I don't believe that the environmental impacts and that assessment is currently or is necessary to be within that. If policy from cabinet is of such that certain considerations should be made, they would be informed and they should implement.
Members, I just want to make a note that this section of the Act, Section 5, is speaking to the OUR directions. So his specific reference here is in alignment with how the Act is framed.
So then the only question is, I mean, just following up.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
So Member Hill, through you, Minister, Chairman, the only question then is whether in respect of this particular recommendation, as was being questioned by Member Crawford and the more general principle enunciated by Member Hill, is whether this particular set of concern, the environment and climate change, should be so prescribed or be prescriptive in the OUR legislation, or should that reside with the minister and the cabinet who gives general direction, which will apply to the OUR as well?
Well, just on a point of order, because the matter was discussed earlier when it was agreed by us that in some of the objectives of this law, we would cite climate change. And in fact, we had given the minister power to determine what constitutes renewable energy. So those matters preceded us in this discussion. And what I'm seeing is just an attempt to ensure that across the board, sufficient regard is given by everybody who is involved in this thing called energy of the importance of climate change. So I just see it as the office and Minister Hill, the office is always the OUR for our discussion purposes here. I just see
Paul, well, the moment Ms. Stoller pointed that out, I realized that what you're saying is exactly right. And yes, given what we wouldn't have seen 25 years ago, we're now seeing climate change. And I would have no problem at all that all parts of our government be made to be aware that climate change is a big issue. So I wouldn't have a problem with this. And especially given what you and Ms. Stoller have pointed out, that we are in fact talking about the Office of the Utilities Regulator.
Very well.
Thank you, members. We'll move then to...
Before you proceed, what are we thanking? Yeah. I'm not clear so what is the end result of this discussion?
That what is there is essentially okay, given that it's going across as much as we can. All government bodies must be made particularly aware of climate change, especially given that we're a small island economy that really is affected very crucially by climate change, even if others aren't. So I wouldn't have a problem.
And importantly, at one time in my life, I had difficulty convincing the OUR of the importance of renewable energy and why it is absolutely crucial to the mix.
You were there.
The current leadership there would not take blame for that. But I know that in my time as minister, it was a hell of a task to convince the OUR that the course that we were on to introduce substantial renewable energy is the right approach. I believe that this is appropriately put to the office now, that anything that will impact on climate change, positively or negatively, ought to be contemplated by the office. And I agree with it being inserted.
Okay, good.
As a former minister responsible for that, I would have to agree 100% as well.
Sir?
Go ahead.
Yes, Chairman. I don't want to be adversarial as it relates to climate change or to seem that way. And the objective and importance is taken. However, still don't understand the necessity of it should make it mandatory rather than optional of the office to consider health environment and should explicitly include emission reduction. I think that it poses, I mean, all right, most recently we're having conversations about a coal plant and whether the government agreed or another government agreed. If there is a decision to implement one which may increase emissions, then what does that mean? It is automatically no once it is not reducing emissions?
I think, member, that I take your point. I mean, making it mandatory is a bit of a thing. Once it is mentioned there that it must take it into consideration, I think that's more than sufficient.
Yeah, that is what that is what I'm saying.
Now that you highlight mandatory in that fashion, Member Crawford, I would go. I don't like the idea of a regulator. We're making a law that will last 20 years and we make it mandatory. Things change. So don't make it mandatory. But with the point that Member Paul and I make, that
high emphasis. High emphasis. Yeah, high emphasis is a good word.
Not mandatory. I agree with
high emphasis is a good word to replace it with.
Let us not forget the modus operandi of the lobby for the environment. And if they can grab anything.
Remember, you have agreement, member. When you have agreement, usually when I was going to the credit committee and you have agreement, I just take my agreement and go on. You have agreement.
All right, I'll take it. Thank you, sir.
Yes. So I'll proceed, Chair, to section 6, which speak to standards of the single bio. And this section has quite a number of comments related to the JPS. So we start the private sector.
There's a point of order, Chairman. I see that we're getting into very thorny discussions now, and I'm wondering if it might not be an appropriate time, especially because some of us have to get ready for Parliament, and of course the parliamentary staff. I suspect this matter could engage us for a long time, and I'm just wondering if now might be the appropriate time to take our break and set another date.
Agreed.
I have no issue with that, especially if in light of the fact that we don't want to do this this particular clause half and leave it. So if we can conclude today after almost 2 hours, I think we would have made great progress. And I think the inputs of everybody has been very, very good. And we are actually doing the work of the people in a harmonious way.
I so move.
Ms. Mark, when is the next date we have set?
I'd indicated, sir, in an email to members that the 7th of October is also free at 10 o'clock next week, Tuesday, Thursday.
Absolutely.
Is that a Wednesday or Thursday?
That's a Thursday.
Okay, yes, I prefer that to the Wednesday because the Parliament sits now on a Wednesday.
So can we agree to that, members, that next week, Thursday at what time?
10 a.m. sir.
Next week, Thursday, same 10 o'clock in the morning, that we can meet, and hopefully we can use that session to take us to completion, or as near to completion as possible.
Chairman, can I just ask the parliamentary staff to check? I believe there's another meeting set for about the same time with a review of the Customs Act. And if I'm correct, then there should be a conflict, and some of us are on both committees. So
Customs meeting is set for 2 p.m.
What time?
2 p.m.
Okay, well, all right.
So you have a meeting at 10 and 2.
Yeah.
All right. So
Chairman, if I could just indicate, I will try to have to get a replacement for me, but I do have a matter in the Supreme Court scheduled for that time.
no problem. If that is the case, Member Campbell, and you have anything that you want to raise or anything, we can easily just look through and give us. And of course, we'll give you an opportunity at another time to speak to it.
I'm grateful, sir.
All right. So thanks very much to my colleagues, and most importantly, to the supporting staff, the ministry, Parliament, SG, and others for your time.
I add my thanks. Thank you all
very much. Very obliged. So meeting adjourned. Everybody keep safe, and see you next week, Thursday at 10 a.m. God bless you all.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.